It's the real news. I'm Aaron Mate. When the U.S. bombed a Syrian military airfield in April, the White House said U.S. intelligence had confirmed the Assad regime used chemical weapons in the town of Khan Sheikhoun. Well, a new report says the opposite is true. Veteran journalist Seymour Hersh reports U.S. intelligence actually warned President Trump it had no evidence that the Syrian military had used sarin gas. Hersh writes that Russia had warned the U.S. about a Syrian military strike before Khan Sheikhoun was bombed. And he says that bombing set off secondary explosions that released poisonous gases on the ground. Seymour Hersh's article, Trump's Red Line, was published by the German newspaper Deutsche Welle. And earlier he joined me to discuss it. Welcome, Cy.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us. So you are reporting that Trump ordered the attack on the Syrian military airfield despite U.S. intelligence doubts that it was in fact Assad who had used chemical weapons in Idlib. Can you explain what that intelligence was?
It was a pre-planned mission. Very simply, it was a secret mission. One of the reasons that a lot of people even in Syria and Russia didn't know what was going on. It was a mission we had. The Russians, look, first of all, you have to understand Russia, Syria, America. We work very closely together on bombing attacks and operations inside the country. I know some people find that surprising. And by the way, we also, part of our American support team, we have planes from the UK, from the Brits, the Aussies. Canadians also fly some missions. They're all guided and monitored by a process known as deconfliction, which just simply means that everybody who moves any place lets one central body, which is a group, a group we control, an office we control, a set of computers. We all know where everybody is. There's not only not been a crash since the bombing began. Russia began bombing, I think, it'll be 2 years ago this fall. And a lot of bombing going on constantly on ISIS targets and al-Nusra targets, etc., rebel targets that we consider to be our enemy, which they are, and so it's monitored. So this is a special mission because Russian intelligence service gave our intelligence service some information about a secret high-level meeting taking place in this town. It's a pretty large city. It was pretty bombed. A lot of bombing has been going on there. There's a lot of bombing. It's all in Idlib province. This is Idlib province. This is the last outpost, the last sort of holding place outside of Raqqa for the rebel opposition, the crazies, the jihadists, the Salafists. Not so much. al-Nusra is very big there. ISIS is very big in Raqqa. But those are the last two places. Bashar is going to hold on. He's going to hold the country together. He's going to start a rebuilding program. Whether we like him or don't like him, that's a reality. The Russians have been effective in bombing in a way that we have not been effective in Afghanistan and in the war in Iraq. They're quite effective, which is also a blow to our ego. If you remember when Russia began bombing, President Obama said it'll be a quagmire for them. Well, it hasn't been. They pulled Bashar, I guess the cliche is up by his bootstraps or whatever. He's now in a dominant position. So we knew about a meeting. The word was from the Russia to us, our intelligence services, was if you have a guy there, if you're buying somebody, we do like to pay money to get information or other reasons. If you have somebody going to that meeting on April 4th in this town at a command and control center, don't let him go. Find a way to get him out gracefully. And so that was kept very secret. So the planning was done for days because it involved, the zone is called, it's Operational Zone 6, really is what they call it. It's a Russia operational zone, Syria operational zone. We do not operate there militarily with planes, bombing. That's done by the other services. And so it was a Syrian plane, an upgraded Syrian plane with a special Russian bomb, a laser-guided bomb. And Russia, unlike us, they don't spend the money we do on laser-guided stuff. The Russians tend to be chary about it, but this is going to be laser-guided, and they brought in a better version of an old MiG called an Su-24 Syrian jet with a very senior Syrian general piloting. And all this was pre-planned and staffed. The target was pre-planned. It was done early in the morning because command and control centers have a lot of people around, and there's shops there where they supply medicines and food. al-Nusra will keep control of the population by having goods, by having cooking oil and propane gas and medicines and foods and disinfectants, which are based on chlorine for washing bodies. There in that society, as you all should know, when you get killed in a bombing raid by in the Muslim world, you have to wash the body and bury it right away. So that's a big reason for the command and control centers to have control. They have the right they have the right soaps and cleaners for this kind of work, all chlorine based, by the way. Anyway, and so everybody knew what the target was, and the president was told when the incident happened, and the other side began talking about, we know nothing about what really happened because no independent unit no UN unit has been allowed to go into the area. It's too dangerous. You could lose your head easy, and not just emotionally, we mean literally. And so there's been no real primary. I have no idea what happened. The other side claims sarin was used. It's very possible there was some local sarin there. I just don't know. But the bomb that was dropped was not sarin. There was no intent by Syria to do anything other than destroy early in the morning a meeting of the leadership of the local jihadist groups there. They had a meeting about what to do.
So here's my question. If Russia warned the U.S. beforehand about this pending strike by the Syrian military on that rebel location, why hasn't Russia come out and said, hey, we even warned the U.S. about this, so they knew in advance that the strike was coming? Why hasn't Russia said that? Because it would further their argument that the U.S. acted erroneously in targeting Assad.
Well, do you really want the other side to know you have inside information on a meeting? I mean, just think it through. If you have a covert, if you're running people, you're running agents, intelligence agents inside, let's say al-Nusra, if you're running operations inside their operations, why would you want to talk about it before or after? You don't. You wouldn't. Just right. Like you don't think we clearly have had people in strange places and learned stuff in advance. We do not talk about it. Even after the fact, there's no reason to talk about it because at this point, you jeopardize those people that are there, although it's pretty obvious that once the bombing took place, there was a secret meeting. A lot of people know somebody betrayed it. But why would you want to, why would you want to talk publicly about it? That doesn't surprise me as being such an anomaly.
Right. Okay. And so those cleaning agents that you mentioned were present in that building. Are you suggesting that that might have been the source of the chemicals that killed and wounded so many people?
Know anything about what happened there? There's been no independent investigation. The one thing we know about is that the power and water was pretty much knocked out in that city. It's a city at one time of about 48,000, a large city, big farming community. And we do know from academic studies that have been by a number of people. There's a guy named Sam Hellert who's written about it out of Yale, who's living in Beirut now. We know that the one way you maintain control in Idlib province, which has a lot of independently minded people, not everybody there is interested in Sharia law. Many are just one-minded. It's a farming community. We know that command and control centers, which was targeted, also have foodstuffs and other stuff. And the understanding was that there either was a two-story building that was a target. There was a basement there. Very likely there would be a lot of stuff supplied there, stored there, including plastic containers full of cooking oil. You may know under a lot of heat, and an explosion, plastic develops into something that in World War I was known as phosgene, another poisonous chemical. But any cloud can be, we all know from fires, people die from smoke inhalation. Any cloud can be very damaging. And the strike took place in April, one of those days in April, which apparently is very not unusual in that region, that area, northern area of Syria. They were close to 60, 70 miles away from the Turkish border, Hatay province. You get a lot of inversions, a lot of cold air holding clouds down. So once you bombed, we saw some bomb damage. I haven't seen it, but I've been told that there were a cloud was formed because there were probably munitions also in the basement. Nobody was quite sure what. The Russians had put up a drone before that for a few days to just see the pattern of life there, what was going on. It's called POL. They monitor who goes in and out, when the stores open. I think that's my guess is, I don't know this, one reason for making the strike so early in the morning was before shops nearby. If there was, I understand there was a shop in which you could buy batteries, shop in which you could buy fabrics. There was a shop where you could get food stores. So there's a lot of stuff there to blow up. And you generated a cloud full of a lot of stuff, chlorine, because the chlorine disinfectant is used for the bodies, other stuff. Do I know if there were the precursors for sarin? I would doubt it. Sarin's pretty lethal, and you'd have to be very sophisticated. But there could have been. And is it possible for some of that stuff to meld and form a less, not a, you know, I did a book about chemical and biological warfare way back in '68, 2,000 years ago, and that was my first book. And one thing about military-grade sarin, it doesn't take a lot to wipe out a population. We're talking about a small container would wipe out, you know, hundreds, if not 1,000, a couple thousand people. It's very lethal within minutes. So this wasn't the most advanced form of sarin, if there was sarin, but we really don't know. That's not the issue. The issue of my story is not to try and explain what happened, but to explain what did not happen. What did not happen is that Syria did not drop a sarin bomb that morning. It was known to everybody in the command, period.
Okay, let's talk about how the White House dealt with this. Can you talk about the internal deliberations inside the White House? Did President Trump receive intelligence that some analysts believed it was inconclusive, or it was conclusive, in fact, that Assad had not dropped the weapon? Did Trump know that?
The story's all about the briefing he got. He did get told beforehand, a day beforehand. There's no evidence to support what you want to believe. There were photographs shown by the Ambassador Haley, that were beamed up. As I said, I started to say earlier, I didn't finish the thought. There was no electricity or water there. We bombed it so much. It wasn't until a team, they call them white helmets, a rescue team, they're first responders who respond primarily in rebel-held territory. That's the best thing to say about them. And there's been reports about their being supported by us and the United Kingdom. But they're certainly there in the rebel territories. They came and they had generators and they had water tanks too, I gather. And by 10, 11 o'clock, YouTube stuff is going up. And I don't know anything about the origin of the photographs, I just don't know. All I know is they began to show some photographs of people suffering badly. I don't know. There were reports they were taken to hospitals. In some places they were showing signs of chlorine poisoning. Other signs were of what they call near sarin or sarin neurotoxic. Sarin causes you to have a bunch of things happen. Eyeballs dilate, you defecate. There's a whole series of symptoms that from sarin, even light form of sarin. But a lot of people survived it, which makes the sarin that was used not the most potent.
And so on Trump's decision-making, he basically tells his advisors that no matter what, we're going to launch a strike. So I want some options. Can you walk us through that?
You're dealing now with the reason I'm writing this story, and the reason why people wanted me to write this story, even though I had a hell of a time getting it published, is the president ignored the intelligence. The intelligence was there. You know, I think he made up his mind. They believe, the people involved, some of them believe he made up his mind right away when he saw photographs whose provenance, whose chain of custody was not known. We don't know where they came from or when they came from. They could have been from there that day. I'm not an expert on it. I'm just telling you, nobody knew where they came from. And if sarin was used, it wasn't, but they knew it wasn't from the bomb. So there was a lot of confusion. But the one point they made is that Syria did not drop a sarin bomb. And he didn't care. He had seen the photographs. That's basically what happened. So they gave him a series. He didn't ask for options. They gave him a series of options for them. The most extreme being decapitation, kill Bashar Assad, assassinate him. 2, with a bomb, or bomb every place where he lived. The first one was do nothing. The second one was what they called the guerrilla option: bang your chest, hit a target that's not very significant, and that's what they did. They warned the planes that did the bombing took off from an airbase a few hundred kilometers, less than that, away, near Homs, farther northwest. And they bombed that airbase after telling the Syrians and the Russians what they were going to do in advance and minimize the damage there. So he got to do some bombing. He got to go on television. He got to get good ratings. He got to look like a serious leader, which is what happens when in America we tend to rally around our captain. And a lot of people were very troubled by the fact that he just overlooked the intelligence. And the purpose of me writing the story really is nothing more than to say presidents should not do that. That's not what you do. You listen to the people that give you the intelligence. And that's the whole point. That gets muddled in a lot of issues because a lot of people see the story as somehow reflecting not as badly as they want the world to reflect on Syria. If you remember, the cry immediately was that Bashar had gassed his own people again with sarin, as he allegedly did 4 years earlier. And then the Russians chimed in by denying it. So here you had Syria, which is obviously very much hated by most Americans, I guess. Polls probably show that we don't like Bashar Assad. And so for the president, it was an easy win. You know, you go bomb somebody nobody likes. And from the press reaction today, it's clear that not liking Syria and not liking Russia for the mainstream press is much more important than what the president did, which always surprises me, but maybe it shouldn't.
Well, Sy, on this point, you report about how the White House did some briefings for the media and pushed on them this line that Assad had definitely used chemical weapons and they were just responding. And you write about, very critically, about how the media went along with it without asking some basic questions.
What else? What else do I do for a living? Pick on the media because they don't ask basic questions, because they harden up stories. Look, you know, you're a reporter, you want to be on page one. I worked at the New York Times for years. The drive to get on page one is pretty acute.
Can you explain, though, what happened there in terms of the vague and qualified language that the White House used, but that still got turned into front-page news on sources like the New York Times?
All that happened is the White House never said it was an official intelligence report. They said it was intelligence information because there was no report that said Syria did it. So they had to go, and they were, the briefer, to his credit, I don't know who he was. Everybody does, but they haven't named him, and I'll go along with that. I don't, you know, that's okay. And the briefer was very careful to say this is intelligence information. He did not say it's the conclusion or the recommendation or the assessment. They didn't even bother with that. And he then had a lot of qualifiers. He said, we believe, we suspect, we did say we assess here and there. And he never, if you actually looked at it, he never really laid the claims. And the reporters, in generally, I picked on the New York Times, but they did the same thing everybody else did. And just they're the best paper we have. And I always like to hold them to the highest possible standard. And most of the time, they meet that standard. Then this is a one-off. When you get a crisis like this, it seems to me no matter whether how much you believe or don't believe the president, you can call him a liar every day. But when there's a crisis like this, everybody gloms on any word that's said and is immediately rushed into print, put in the headlines. And it's too bad because it leads to a lot of sort of vague reporting and inaccurate and reporting. And so the papers hardened what was said. You know, they said they even went to the point they suspected that there could be a sarin depot, sarin processing point at the airfield. Well, let me tell you something about the real stuff, the military stuff, which, of course, the United Nations knows more about. If you remember, after the incident in 2013, the alleged sarin attack by Syria, a group called the OCPW, OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, it's a UN group. They're responsible for monitoring something called the Chemical Weapons Convention. They took out, I think, 14 months they spent taking out all of the chemical weapons known to be in Syrian arsenal, including all of the gases and chemicals that, when melded together, make sarin. And nobody knows more about the sarin that's in the Syrian arsenal than that group, that the prohibition group, the OPCW. They know whether there's a big difference between military-grade sarin, which has additives in it for toxicity, lethality, to make it easier to handle, and what we call kitchen sarin. We know that al-Nusra, for example, there's been intelligence reporting. I've written about it. I mean, I actually have the reports. There's been intelligence reporting since early in 03, June of 03, June of 13 rather. And we know that it goes back even further with Al-Qaeda, that there's been a great interest in chemical weapons, including nerve gas, by the jihadists.
A last question. This attack on the Syrian airbase and what Trump is doing right now in Syria, do you think Trump is escalating military conflict inside Syria aimed toward Assad and Iran?
Doesn't matter what I think. It only matters what I know. Now you're acting, you know, I don't watch cable television anymore because reporters and politicians go on And they begin every time they have a panel, and they ask the panel a question, you know, in the nightly those shows. And the first thing, the first two words everybody says is, "I think." I don't care what somebody thinks about politics. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know. I don't think many of us do. I think probably Trump doesn't either. So there we are.
We'll leave it there. I want to thank Seymour Hersh, the legendary investigative journalist. His latest piece for Deutsche Welle is Trump's Red Line. Thank you, Sy.
Tell your boss hello.
Will do.
Yeah,
and thank you for joining us on The Real News.